So in part two, we wanted to talk specifically about how the work we're doing in Blended gets to the how of the framework for teaching, the accelerated learning process, and cultural proficiency. So let's look at the framework for teaching. We all know that the framework for teaching is descriptors of high quality instruction. This is the reason we focused on it over the last few years, is to really get at describing what we should be seeing in classrooms that based on the research and based on high leverage strategies, what should be happening in classrooms. It's also, and this is an important theme in Vanguard, that technology is not the answer, right? This isn't about tech tools. We certainly use them, we find them to be helpful, but technology or technology software will never be the answer. What Vanguard's really about is leveraging the power of each of you as teachers. You know, what skill set, what knowledge do you bring to the table? What experiences do you have that allows you to use blended and personalized instruction to get to that high quality instruction in the classroom? And as you know, the goal is to move right on the framework. How long, how frequently can you kind of live in the distinguished area? You know, we often say that it's not a place you live in, but you know, our goal is to try to see that as much as we can throughout our instructional day. And you know, when I was teaching, I wanted to move right on the framework that I used when I was a teacher. So let's talk a little specifically about what that looks like. So this is 2C, which is managing classroom procedures. And you can see that we have the proficient language from the rubric as well as the distinguished language. Just take a second and look at those and look at the differences between moving right from proficient to distinguished. So as we see here in proficient, little loss of instructional time, that's great. You know, proficient is a great measure of what occurs in a classroom. So all this makes sense right here, but what really moves you over to the fore is this idea around students having initiative and students being involved in the management of their classrooms. Now, you can have this level of initiative in a classroom that's not blended. I've certainly seen this even in our pre-K classrooms where students do understand part of the routines and can take responsibility for this. Just ask anybody that's ever substituted in a kindergarten classroom. They'll often hear from the students, well, that's not how we do it here, or that's not how Miss so-and-so does it, and they understand their routines and can take responsibility for that. But in a blended classroom, I think in some ways this can be where this model moves to an even higher level. So students being able to engage in collaborative activities, being on a tech tool for a period of time and working an online assignment, or even being offline with you as the teacher, and how are you working with students, and then how do students move through that environment? Do they know where and when to go? Do they know how to manage their own work? So this really gets into that student level of responsibility. And then let's switch to 3D, which is using assessment in instruction. I'll let you read through these, looking for the differences between proficiency and being distinguished. So if you were if I was here in front of you, I would ask you the difference between this, and you all would nail it, which is the difference between teacher looking at groups of students and then looking at students as individuals. That's really how we move from proficient to distinguished. I believe in a blended and personalized classroom. This is the way to really get to individual students. Whether you're using an adaptive software as part of your instructional program, or whether or not you have the assessment data that really allows you to see the differences between individual students, and that you can somehow get to those students without having to create 32 different lesson plans, right? So how sophisticated is the classroom that you can use assessment, know what kids know and don't know at the individual level, and how do you then differentiate for them? So that's how I believe blended and personalized learning will get us to be able to implement the framework for teaching in the form that we're looking for in the district. So let's look at another systemic initiative, and that's the Accelerated Learning Process, or ALP. Many of you have been involved in that, and there are 4 basic components to the Accelerated Learning Process: instructional design, content knowledge, evidence of learning, and student agency. Well, blended and personalized classrooms are the way that you can adjust your instructional design based on the evidence of learning that you see in students. So if we look at this evidence of learning and we go back and do instruction in the exact same way, we're likely not to see different results. In addition, blended and personalized classrooms are ways for you to revisit content knowledge. So again, if your evidence of learning shows that students didn't gather or grasp certain content, then you can revisit that. You might put an instructional design in place, but if you don't have the content knowledge, you may actually create a great instructional design to get at learning that doesn't tie into this evidence of learning. Blended and personalized classrooms have a lot of different ways to gather evidence of learning. It's not just a quiz and a test. Quizzes and tests are great. They're an important part of what we do. But what are the ongoing assessment tools that we use? What are the formative measures? How do we use exit tickets? How do we use digital tools to gather information quickly? I think blended and personalized classrooms will allow you to gather better and more frequent evidence of learning. And of course, student agency, if there's one thing a personalized blended classroom will do, is build student agency. Whether that's students managing their own time within a classroom, managing the work that they've been given some choice over time, place, path, or pace, or even setting their own personal goals, or even self-assessing. These are all student agency factors that can take accelerated learning process from being a thing that we think about to something that we do in our classrooms every day. And that's the goal of that process. The third systemic initiative centers around cultural proficiency and equity. So cultural proficiency, we know, is a very important part of that journey, is an internal journey. It's how we deal with our own personal biases. It's how we deal with any of our own personal prejudices. It means a lot of understanding how you interact with others in the world, and being able to understand and empathize with others that you meet, right? So we've been talking about that for quite a few years now. But when you get down to it in classrooms, it's really about knowing your students, their interests, their needs, their backgrounds. And these needs could be learning needs, they could be social emotional needs. The interests could be everything from, a kid who really likes dinosaurs all the way up through a student who is interested in bicameral government. Anyway, some kids are. And so understanding what the interests are, understanding what students' needs are, also their backgrounds. What about their lives brings them, comes to the classroom with them. So are they a student who's traveled across the world because their parents' job has been such that they do that? Or is this a kid who's their world as they know it is probably a 3 or 4 block radius? And so how do we engage with those kids? What do we do with differences in background knowledge on content? Cultural proficiency allows us to be able to look at, having cultural proficiency allows us to be able to look at kids from all of those different lenses and understand, in the end, what are the strategies that best support those students, right? And so what are the high leverage things that we're doing in classrooms to now target these interests, needs, and backgrounds? And that's a little bit of an oversimplification of cultural proficiency, but you can see if we have a classroom that teaches kids one way all the time, we're likely not going to be successful with all students. Some kids will get it. Some kids are really good at the school game. Some kids have lots of background. Some kids have lots of support at home. But if we're going to target those achievement gaps, we really need to be proficient in this particular area. So that's some of the ways that blended and personalized learning and your journey in Vanguard will help us implement our systemic initiative. So what's the next challenge for you in the lead year? So you're moving from the teach year to the lead year, and then after that you're going to move on to the coach year. And that's going to be a little bit different. But what do we expect in the leadership year? Well, we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to emphasize it's about your example. So how you instruct in your classroom, how you monitor student learning, how you use tech tools in a safe and responsible manner, all of that is leading by example. And there will be many of your colleagues that will look to that. These are the folks that will come across the hall and ask what you're doing, or ask if you can show them how to use a particular tool. That's a way to lead. And we have many, many teachers across the district that do that every day, right? They are great examples of what we want in a Frederick County Public School teacher. But then there's the other side of that, which are actual leadership actions. Now, you have a lot of different ways that you'll be able to demonstrate this in your micro-credentials, but In fact, I would guarantee you, if you were there and I asked you to raise your hand, how many of you have helped a teacher with a tech tool, or maybe even a team of teachers? How many people have led some kind of professional learning in a after school activity or at a faculty meeting? How many of you have led a Twitter chat, or how many of you have held a book study in your school? Those are all leadership examples that you might have already done. And I know that many of you have been a great resource during the school closure in our distance learning time. So leadership has really been supercharged across the district. We're going to ask that you focus on these two areas in the coming year, your example and the actions that you'll take. And I want to just tell you an anecdotal story about one of our vanguards who's in cohort 1. This is a very, very strong teacher when they came into the program. But they're more of a quieter, introverted kind of personality. And going into the leadership year, they had a lot of hesitancy about what that means. What's it mean to put yourself out there as a leader? And so working with us, specifically with Eric and Amy, we presented them with a couple of challenges, and this teacher took on some responsibilities within their school. And there were a couple of things that this teacher learned and told us about their journey. One, it could be a little nerve-wracking. Putting yourself out there does have some risk to it. Not everybody embraces new things with enthusiasm, and sometimes you get some pushback. But more importantly, this person realized the reward of being able to help others in a leadership position. And they told us that basically every time I do this, it gets a little bit easier, and I really like the fact that I'm helping other people and that I can be a part of this bigger mission of the school. And so the growth that we've seen in teachers by taking on these leadership roles really helped this teacher lay the path to now where they can be a coach in our district. So all of us that are in leadership roles have had our leadership journeys, and I will tell you that the things that this teacher was saying I could relate to from my own personal leadership journey when I was a teacher and serving as a teacher leader in the districts that I worked in. So really want you to think about that. The impact that you'll be able to have next year is not going to be a normal year by any stretch. We don't know what it looks like exactly, but I do know this. If there's one thing that vanguards will be ready to do is lead in an environment and a teaching and a school operations that's going to be different, because you've already shown it, right? You've already been successful as we closed out the fourth quarter, as we worked through all of the things that had to be worked through in a distance learning. Vanguard stepped up and were part of that. So I look forward to your leadership journey next year, and thank you for everything you've done this year. Have a great day.